And today, on behalf of all of you, let me extend a warm welcome to our very special guest tonight, Mr. Karan Thapar. Take your seat, Karan, please. So I would like to begin with asking you, see, when you're in front of the camera, when you're in a studio, you look like a Roman gladiator entering the arena. You know, your swords are drawn, and you know that you have an audience cheering you on, they're baying for blood, and then you straight go for the kill. You don't even let sometimes your subjects warm up, get ready. So do you sometimes feel more like a warrior than a journalist in front of the camera?
I have to begin by saying that my mother had the same impression of me. She used to say to me when she was 98, when I was talking to her, and I would ask her a question, she said, "Stop it now, stop it. You're not interviewing me." And I said, "What's the problem? What have I done?" She says, "You keep repeating the question. I have a right not to answer, and if I don't want to answer, I won't." And I suppose that attitude reflects itself in the way I do interviews. It's not put on, it's not deliberate. It just comes naturally to me, but I suppose it conveys to the audience the impression that this is a gladiatorial warrior baying for a fight. But honestly, that's not my intention. And if I were able to control the manner in which I appear, I promise you I would try and change it, but it just happens.
Is she a very intimidating woman, or did you just rile her up? And can you tell that story? What happened during that interview?
I'll tell you the story what happened. The interview was first fixed for a date roughly a year and a half before it happened. But at the last moment, Jaya Jayalatha had to cancel because she got arrested, taken to jail, and was forced to resign. When she returned as Chief Minister, we requested another interview. This is for the BBC program Hard Talk India, which I used to present at the time, and they agreed. And my first hint that she was going to be a difficult person to interview happened the night before when I got telephoned by her secretary to say, "Madam wants to do the interview half an hour early." Now, I had expected the secretary to ring and say, "Madam's cancelled the interview." So when he said she wants to do the interview half an hour early, I said, "I have no problem at all. We can do it a whole hour early." He says, No, it has to be just half an hour early because Madam says 2 o'clock is an auspicious time. She wants to start at 2. And that was the first hint I got, that this was the lady who obviously believed in a lot more things than just giving journalistic interviews. So I arrived at Fort St. George, and we were taken up to the top floor where her office is, and the room was freezing cold. It had been reduced to 15 degrees, and everyone's teeth was chattering. And I was escorted into the room, and I tried desperately hard to suggest, "Can we not raise the temperature? It's so cold I can barely think straight." And they said, No, Madam likes it at this temperature.
Okay, moving on to the next question, Karan. You have interviewed many prime ministers except the current one.
I interviewed the current one before he became Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, yeah. And who's your true friend? You call him a true friend.
He
Yes,
called
and I think you're
me
still
a true friend.
But you're still waiting for that Bojan interview, Bojan invitation that he promised you once.
His last words to me was, "Dosti bani rahe." And the next day he rang me up and said, "Karan, brother, I love you. Jab Delhi aunga, to bhojan karenge." And I don't know about the love. I haven't seen very much of it. But he's been in Delhi for the last 5 years, and Divaside bhojan karenge, we haven't even ever met. So I think those were just clever words that people say.
Yeah. See, that was an interview that you did in 2007, and now it's all more than 10 years. I think that interview has
12.
12 years, yeah. So that interview has a life of its own, because it has some way defined your career in some way, and it has defined Mr. Modi's political career too. But what I would like to know is, I think in that first, because it's had millions of views on YouTube, in the first minutes itself, you asked him to apologize for the Godhra carnage. What were you thinking?
Well, I'll tell you how it began. If you recall my first question, it was to say to him, "Chief Minister, you're 6 weeks away from a re-election. India Today magazine and the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation consider you the best Chief Minister in the country, but 140 million Muslims look upon you as a mass murderer." And I'll pause there and slightly sidetrack and tell you why I use the word mass murderer as well. I thought about it, and I said to myself, it's a provocative term, it's bound to rile him, and so half of me felt, don't use it, because you'll end up going down a tangent as a result of using the term. But the other half of me said, the truth is, that 140 million Muslims do look upon him as a mass murderer. When they talk to each other, that is the precise language they use. And if I am going to be truthful in putting to the chief minister what these people think of him, then I must use the language they would use. If I use a softer, euphemistic phrase, I am deceiving him and I'm not being truthful to the audience. I'm weakening the language to give the wrong impression, and that would be untruthful. And so I convinced myself that it was right and proper to use the words they would have used if they'd been in a position to sit in front of him and speak to him directly. However, this clearly was not the language that he wanted to hear.
Did something
Let me
wrong.
explain that.
Why would you apologize?
I'll tell you, I explain. I would only apologize, I say, if they had said to me that I'd done something wrong and I was convinced I was. Because if they can tell me that I've done something wrong and prove that I've done something wrong, I have no false pride in apologizing. All of us make mistakes. They're not intended mistakes. But I don't believe I'd done anything wrong. But the reason I met all these people is because by January 2017, I began to realize that I was being boycotted by the BJP. There had been no problem from May 2014 when Mr. Modi was sworn in right up till December 2016 or January 2017, when endless BJP ministers had given interviews on a weekly basis, when BJP spokesperson had appeared on my shows on a daily basis. But suddenly, around December, January 2016, 2017, I discovered that I was being boycotted, that spokesmen were not appearing on my show, that ministers would accept interviews and then back out on the silliest of excuses 24 hours later. And I said to myself, this has happened so often and it's happened on so many occasions that this is not a coincidence. There is something more behind it. Sambit Patra was the first person as spokesman of the BJP who I spoke to, and I said, what is the problem? And he said to me, let me tell you in confidence, we've been asked not to appear on your shows. No spokesman will appear on your shows. We've been told not to appear. That Modi needed to learn how to handle difficult, awkward questions and difficult, awkward moments. And we played this to him 25 or 30 times so that he could realize what were the errors and mistakes he mustn't repeat again. Modi then said to Prashant, which Prashant communicated to Pavan, that he had kept Karan behind after the interview for a whole hour, giving him mithai, tea and dhokla, which is true, because he wanted Karan to believe there was no ill will and no bad feeling and no bad blood. But Modi added, I will get my revenge. And that conversation with Pavan, following the earlier conversations with Nripendra Mishra and Amit Shah, made me realize that it had taken Mr. Modi something like 2.5 years to work out that there are many subtle and clever ways in which you can actually neutralize, if not neuter, journalists. You don't have to censor them necessarily. You simply need to boycott them. If someone makes a profession out of interviewing politicians, holding discussions, panel discussions on television, and the ruling party decides to boycott them, it becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible, to carry on doing your job. You can occasionally invite people who are affiliated to the BJP, people who are friends of the BJP to speak on behalf of the BJP, but it's nowhere near the same thing. But you can't do that when you actually need to do an interview with the defense minister or the home minister or the agriculture minister or the finance minister, because if they won't come, there's no one else who can represent them. And therefore, boycotting television journalists becomes a very effective way of neutralizing them, or as I said, neutering them. It's wonderful to see a prime minister being questioned about dressing deliberately badly. And why ever not? They represent us, right? I mean...
But Karan, I think it is your idea of, what is a well-presented prime minister.
But obviously,
so you are a
it has to be. But Anjana, think about it. It has to be my idea. I'm not holding a public poll to get a public opinion about what is considered good dressing before I ask the question.
No, but you are a self-confessed Anglophile, so your idea of a certain elegance
by the
shouldn't
way,
be the
but
prime
you're missing it.
minister's
It had
sort of
nothing to
elegance.
do with Anglophilia whatsoever. It was to do with the fact that Indian mothers deliberately make sure that their young children are properly washed and cleaned and scrubbed. They have the cleanest clothes and well-pressed clothes, even if they're poor, and their eyes with kajal and their hair with oil, all combed and done. That is the Indian way of presenting your children, of presenting yourself. You make an effort to do the best you can. It's got nothing to do with wealth. It's got nothing to do with Anglophilia. It's to do with the traditional Indian attitude that you put your best foot forward. When the Prime Minister of the country that represents all of us chooses instead to put a crumpled foot forward with a dhoti that looks creased, probably it's got haldi stains on the wretched thing as well, with his hair uncombed, right? Unsure whether he's shaven or not shaven, you say to yourself, this is not an Indian way of appearing. So, the truth of the matter, and you might not believe this, but it is absolutely true, is that Amitabh Bachchan himself is responsible for the fact that I asked him those questions. I was doing an interview with Amitabh to mark his 50th birthday. And that tells you how long ago this happened. It happened roughly 25, 26 years ago. And during one of the tape changes, and in those days we used to film on huge big cameras, and the big tapes were called beta, and they took a fair amount of time to change. So during one of the tape changes, which must have lasted for 5 minutes, Amitabh said, had I ever seen an interview with Warren Beatty, the American actor?
So my question is that if he's not even fielding questions from media, just except something like some Banana Republic channels, so what is the future of India's democracy? And last question, I'll stop there. If Mr. Modi comes to power once again, where do you find the future of India's democracy?
It's tempting to argue that the manner in which the press is being treated is undermining democracy. And perhaps that's not an exaggeration either. The truth is that we don't have censorship under Mr. Modi of the 1975 style as you did during the emergency. But you have something that is more insidious and that works itself under the skin. Think about it. At least 3 editors, some from very prominent papers like the Hindu, the Hindustan Times, and the Tribune, have lost their jobs for spurious reasons, but widely believed because the PMO rang up and told the owners they should be removed. Several anchors, not just me, but several on NDTV, are being boycotted by the government. Deliberately, government spokesmen, government ministers will not give them interviews. There are other instances where columnists have had their columns dropped and columnists themselves have been dropped. Again, that's happened in several instances. And then there's what happened on ABP TV, where anchors and managing editors lost their jobs because of stories that they'd done which were directly connected to Mr. Modi. There's no doubt that this is a government that does not appreciate criticism and will go to any length to throttle it. But it is clever enough not to indulge in the direct censorship that Mrs. Gandhi had used in the emergency. No one can accuse it of outright censorship. But it is equally true that in every one of the instances that I have cited, it is widely believed that the hand of the government lies behind what's happened. But there is no obvious, clear-cut, irrefutable proof of this, but it is so widely believed, and it has happened so often that it cannot be a coincidence.